The text from my mother arrived on a Tuesday, carrying the kind of casual cruelty I should have been used to by now. It was a digital invitation for my twin sister's 25th birthday gala, followed by a separate message. "Stay home. Nobody wants you there." I stared at the screen, trying to swallow the familiar ache of exclusion, until I realized what was actually wrong. Lila and I are twins, and we turned 33 last October. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day so aggressively ordinary that the intrusion felt like a physical blow. I was standing in my kitchen, waiting for the coffee to brew, watching the gray light of early spring filter through the blinds. My phone buzzed against the granite counter, a single, sharp vibration that usually signaled a weather alert or a spam email. I picked it up. It was a group message from my mother, Marlene. There was no greeting. There was no preamble. There was just a single sentence that sat on the screen, cold and absolute. "Stay home. Nobody wants you there." Below the text was an attachment. It was a glossy, high-resolution graphic, the kind designed by a professional firm, featuring a cascade of champagne gold balloons and elegant, serif typography. It invited the recipient to the lake house in Briar Glen for a black tie celebration. The central text was bolded in shimmering foil: Lila's 25th birthday bash. I stared at the image. I read the words again. Then I looked at the coffee maker, which was gurgling its final breath, and looked back at the phone. My brain refused to process the information in the order it had been received. The insult, "Nobody wants you there," I could handle. I had been handling variations of that sentence for 3 decades. It was the number that made the room tilt. 25. I put the phone down on the counter and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. I took a breath, counting to 4, and picked the phone up again. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe the graphic designer had made a catastrophic error and my mother, in her infinite chaotic wisdom, had sent it to me to complain. But that did not explain the text. "Stay home. Lila is my twin sister. We shared a womb. We shared a room until we were 18. We shared the same terrifyingly precise hazel eyes and the same stubborn cowlick at the left temple. And most importantly, we shared a birth date that occurred 33 years ago. We were 33. We had been 33 since October. We had celebrated our 30th birthdays together at a grim dinner where my father checked his watch 5 times before the appetizers arrived. I unlocked my phone and opened social media. I usually kept my accounts deactivated, a habit born from years of trying to make myself smaller, but I had reactivated them last month to check on a coworker's wedding registry. I typed my sister's name into the search bar. The results washed over me like ice water. It was not just the invitation, it was everywhere. My cousin, a woman who had babysitted us when we were actually 10, had posted a throwback photo of Lila with the caption, "Can't believe this little angel is hitting the quarter-century mark. See you in Briar Glen." A neighbor from our childhood street, a man who had definitely seen us learn to drive 17 years ago, had commented on my mother's timeline. 25 already? Time flies when they are this beautiful. Dozens of posts, scores of comments. It was a coordinated assault on reality. I sat on my bar stool, the coffee forgotten, scrolling through a digital landscape where the last 8 years of my life had simply been deleted. It was disorienting, inducing a kind of vertigo that made my stomach turn. If they were lying about her age, they were lying about mine. I felt a sudden, frantic need to hear a human voice confirm that I existed in the correct timeline. I dialed my father. "Grant." He answered on the first ring, which was my second warning. Grant Phillips never answered on the first ring. He believed availability was a sign of weakness. "Grant," I said. "Lucy," he replied. His voice was tight, clipped. It sounded like he was standing in a room full of people, holding the phone slightly away from his ear. "I told your mother not to send the invite to you. It was supposed to be a suppression list." Suppression list. The term was corporate. Sterile. "Dad," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Why is the entire internet convinced Lila is 25? We are 33. I have wrinkles. Dad, I have a 401k. What is happening? He sighed. A long, ragged sound that crackled with static. It is just a theme. Lucy, it is for the aesthetic. It is a playful thing. You know how Lila is. She wants to recapture her youth. Recapture her youth? I asked, my voice rising. She is not 80. She is 33. And people are posting like it is real. Cousin Sarah thinks it is real. Sarah knows it is a party. Grant snapped. Everyone knows it is a party. Why do you always do this? Do what? I asked. Make things weird. He said. The phrase hit me in the center of the chest. It was an old weapon, smooth from years of use. Whenever I pointed out that my mother had forgotten to pick me up from school, I was making things weird. When I asked why Lila got a car and I got a bus pass, I was making things weird. When I questioned why I was the only one not allowed in the holiday photos because my outfit clashed with the decor, I was making things weird. It is not weird to ask why you are erasing 8 years of our lives. I said. Grant lowered his voice. It dropped an octave. Becoming dangerous. You are not coming. Lucy, that is not a request. It is a directive. Lila deserves a night where she does not have to worry about your jealousy or your drama. Do not show up. Do not post anything. Do not comment on anyone's photos correcting them. Just stay in your apartment and let your sister have her moment. He hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went dark. I stood in the silence of my apartment, feeling the familiar spiral begin. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in the throat, a heat behind the eyes. It was the feeling of being the glitch in the family system. For as long as I could remember, the Phillips family had been a beautifully curated stage play, and I was the prop that kept falling over. I poured the coffee down the sink. I could not drink it. My hands were shaking. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa, pulling a blanket over my knees. I told myself to let it go. This was the price of peace. If I wanted to maintain the fragile, threadbare connection I still had with them, I had to swallow the lie. I had to pretend that being told to stay home from a milestone birthday was normal. I had to pretend that my twin sister turning 25 was just a quirky joke. But the logic did not hold. You do not rent a lakeside venue in Briar Glen for a joke. You do not print gold foil invitations for a joke. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. I checked the peephole. It was a courier. A man in a brown uniform holding a clipboard and looking impatient. I opened the door. Sign here, he said, thrusting the electronic pad at me. I scribbled my signature, and he kicked a large cellophane-wrapped basket across the threshold before turning and marching back to the elevator. I looked down at the delivery. It was massive. It looked less like a gift basket and more like a shrine to luxury. There were bottles of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, jars of caviar, silk eye masks, and boxes of artisanal chocolates. Tucked into the gold ribbon was a card. I knelt on the floor and pulled the envelope free. It was addressed, in elegant calligraphy, to Ms. Lila Phillips. Below the name, it read, 25. I frowned. The courier had come to my apartment. I lived in the city, 40 minutes away from the house where Lila still lived with our parents. I looked at the shipping label stuck to the bottom of the basket. Ship to Lila Phillips. Address 404 Elm Street, apartment 4B. My address. I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Lila, darling, whatever you are doing, it is working. The camera loves you, and the test shots from last week were absolute magic. Enjoy the goodies. Rest up for the big launch. We are going to make history. Happy 25th. Love, the team at Starling Company. I sat back on my heels. Starling Company. I recognized the name. It was a boutique talent agency, the kind that represented influencers and micro-celebrities, people who were famous for being famous. My sister was a receptionist at a dental office, or at least, she had been last month. Why was a talent agency sending her $1,000 worth of champagne? And why did they think she lived at my apartment? I looked closer at the shipping label. My eyes scanned the small print at the bottom. where the billing information was usually listed. Bill to, account ending in 4902. My blood ran cold. I scrambled up from the floor and ran to my purse. Digging out my wallet, I pulled out my primary credit card. The last 4 digits were 4902. I stood there, breathing hard, the card in one hand and the note in the other. It was a mistake. It had to be. Maybe I had bought something for Lila years ago, and the agency had pulled the old data, but I had never bought anything from a talent agency, and this card was new. I had only activated it 6 months ago. I needed Tessa. I dialed her number, putting it on speaker as I paced the length of my small living room. Tessa picked up immediately. She always did. She was the only person in my life who saw the Phillips family for what they were, rather than what they pretended to be. "Tell me I am crazy," I said as soon as the line connected. "Hello to you too," Tessa said. "You sound manic. What did Marlene do?" I explained. I told her about the text, the invitation, the 25 years, the basket, the credit card number. Tessa listened in silence, which was rare for her. When I finished, the silence stretched out for 10 seconds. "Lucy," she said finally. Her voice was serious, stripped of its usual sarcasm. "That is not a typo, I know," I said, "but maybe it is just a party theme, like Dad said?" Tessa snorted. "A party theme doesn't charge champagne to your credit card. Loose, and a party theme doesn't involve a talent agency talking about a launch. What are you saying?" I asked. "I am saying that either your family is lying about Lila's age for fun, which is psychotic, or they are lying about something much bigger for money, which is criminal." I looked at the basket. The cellophane glinted under the kitchen lights. "It feels believable," I whispered. "That is the worst part. It feels like something they would do." "Because it is something they would do," Tessa said. "Remember when you graduated college and they told everyone you were taking a gap year because Lila failed her finals and they didn't want her to look bad? They rewrite history to suit the narrative. Lucy, this is just a really big rewrite." I rubbed my temples. "What do I do?" "Check your credit," Tessa said. "Right now, if that card was used, God knows what else is going on." We hung up, and I sat down at my laptop. My fingers felt numb as I navigated to the credit reporting site. I typed in my social security number, my date of birth, my address. I hit enter. A red banner appeared across the top of the screen. "Access denied. A security freeze is currently in place for this file." I stared at the screen. I had not placed a freeze. I had applied for a car loan 3 months ago. My credit had been open and fine. I grabbed my phone and called the bank, navigating the hellscape of automated menus until I finally got a human being on the line. "I need to ask about a charge," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And I need to ask about authorized users." The representative asked me for my security questions: mother's maiden name, name of first pet, street I grew up on. I answered them mechanically. "Okay, Ms. Phillips," the representative said, her tone cheerful. "I see the account here. You are the primary cardholder. Are there any other users on the account?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "A Ms. Lila Phillips was added as an authorized user on the 14th of last month." I closed my eyes. "Did I authorize that?" The representative paused. "There is a digital signature on file, submitted via the mobile app. It matches the login credentials, my login credentials, and the email address associated with the user edition?" I asked. "It is, let me see here, Marlene Phillips, design@email.com. The air left my lungs. My mother had logged into my account, added my sister, and was now using my credit history to fund a lie about my sister's age. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat in the silence, looking at the gift basket. It sat there like a mocking monument to my stupidity. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build a wall between myself and them. I had moved to the city. I had gotten a job they didn't understand. I had paid my own bills. I had thought I was safe. But I wasn't safe. I was just a resource they hadn't tapped yet. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. I was 12 years old. We were at a photography studio in the mall, dressed in matching velvet dresses that scratched at the neck. The photographer was trying to arrange us. He wanted Lila in the front, holding a bouquet of fake roses. He wanted me behind her, looking over her shoulder. My mother had stepped in. She had grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the soft flesh of my bicep. "Not so close. Lucy," she had hissed. "You are crowding her. You bring the mood down. You look gloomy. Just fade back a little. Let Lila shine." I had stepped back. I had faded. And when the photos came back, I was a blurry shape in the background, a shadow behind the radiant, golden light of my sister. At the time, I had thought it was because I was ugly. I had thought it was because I was unlovable. Now, looking at the credit card statement on my screen, looking at the freeze on my credit report, I realized it wasn't about love. It wasn't even about hate. It was about utility. I was the shadow so Lila could be the light. I was the wallet so Lila could be the star. I was the 33-year-old reality so Lila could be the 25-year-old fantasy. I stood up. The spiral was gone. In its place was a cold, hard knot of clarity. I walked to the closet and pulled out a coat. I did not put on a dress. I did not put on makeup. I put on jeans and a black sweater. I put on boots that were good for walking. I picked up my car keys. My father had told me to stay home. He had told me not to make it weird. He had told me that nobody wanted me there. He was right. Nobody wanted me there. That was exactly why I had to go. I was not going to make a scene. I told myself this as I walked out the door, locking it behind me. I was not going to scream or cry or flip tables. I was simply going to Briar Glen. I was going to stand in the back. I was going to watch. I needed to see the lie with my own eyes. I needed to see how big it was. I needed to know if my sister, my twin, the person who had shared a womb with me, was a prisoner of this delusion or the architect of it. I got into my car. The engine roared to life, a sound that felt like a challenge. Briar Glen was an hour away. The roads would be clear. I backed out of my parking spot, the tires crunching on the gravel. I merged onto the highway, heading north, driving toward the fake birthday of a sister who was stealing my life. One credit card transaction at a time. I drove toward the lake, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like the difficult one. I felt like the only person who was awake. I drove fast. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of gray asphalt cutting through the green hills. I turned off the radio. I didn't want music. I wanted to think. I thought about the money. How much had they charged? The basket was easily $500. The venue in Briar Glen, the lake house, was a premier spot. Weddings there cost $30,000. If they were throwing a launch party, who was paying for that? Was it me? Was I paying for my own erasure? The thought made my grip on the steering wheel tighten until my knuckles were white. I thought about the launch. What was Lila launching? She had never shown ambition for anything other than being adored. She had dropped out of community college twice. She had quit 3 jobs because the managers were mean. She was sweet, in a vapid, pliable way. But she was not a businesswoman. She was not a talent, unless the talent was being young, unless the product was youth itself. I passed the exit for the suburbs where my parents lived. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the destination. Briar Glen was a wealthy enclave, a place of manicured lawns and gated driveways. It was the kind of place my parents aspired to, the kind of place they pretended they belonged in. It fit. Of course they would stage the lie here. As I got closer, the scenery changed. The strip malls and gas stations gave way to stone walls and iron fences. The trees were older, taller. The air felt expensive. I saw the first sign 2 miles from the venue. It was a yard sign, planted in the grass at a busy intersection. It was simple, black and gold. Lila's 25th, this way. An arrow pointed left. I followed the arrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, bird-like rhythm. It was real. It was actually happening. I turned the corner and saw another sign, and another. They were leading the way like breadcrumbs. I finally reached the entrance to the lake house. It was a sprawling estate with a wrought iron gate that stood open. A security guard was checking a list, but the line of cars was long, and he seemed overwhelmed. I did not pull up to the gate. I was not a guest. I was a ghost. I drove past the entrance, finding a spot on the shoulder of the road about a quarter-mile down. I parked the car behind a thick hedge of rhododendrons. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I looked 33. I looked like a woman who had just found out her family was a criminal enterprise. I took a deep breath. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cool air. I could hear music drifting from the venue. It was a bass-heavy thumping beat. It sounded like a club. It sounded young. I started walking toward the music. I walked in the grass, staying off the pavement, keeping to the shadows of the trees. I was not here to ruin it. I told myself again. I was just here to witness. But as I walked, feeling the damp earth beneath my boots, feeling the anger radiating from my chest, I knew that was a lie. 2. I wasn't just here to witness. I was here to understand why I had been discarded. And if the answer was as bad as I thought it was, I wasn't sure I could stay quiet. I reached the edge of the property. I crouched behind a stone pillar. Peering through the iron bars of the fence, the driveway was packed with luxury cars. Valets were running back and forth. People were streaming toward the main building. Women in sequined gowns, men in tuxedos. They looked glamorous. They looked important. And then I saw the staff. A group of servers walked past the gate, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. They were wearing matching black t-shirts. I squinted to read the white text printed on the back of their shirts. Lila turns 25. I felt a wave of nausea. It was so committed. It was so absolute. I watched as a car pulled up. A sleek, silver convertible. A woman got out. I recognized her immediately. It was Mrs. Gable, a friend of my mother's from the country club. She had known me since I was 5. She had given me a savings bond for my high school graduation. She was laughing, holding a gift bag that looked suspiciously similar to the one sitting on my living room floor. She handed her keys to the valet and glided toward the entrance. Adjusting her shawl, she didn't look around. She didn't ask where Lucy was. She just walked into the fantasy, ready to celebrate a lie. I stood there, gripping the cold iron of the fence. I should go. I thought, I have seen enough. It is real. They are insane. I should go to the police. I should go to a lawyer. But I didn't move, because just then, the double doors of the venue opened, and my mother walked out. Marlene looked spectacular. She was wearing a floor-length gown in a deep, shimmering navy. Her hair was perfectly coiffed. She looked like the queen of a small, wealthy nation. She was holding a clipboard. She was shouting something at a florist who was adjusting an archway of white roses. "Move it to the left," she yelled. "The light hits better from the left. We need the angles to be perfect for the reveal." The reveal. My mother wasn't planning a party. She was directing a scene. I watched her. A woman I had spent my life trying to please. A woman who had just stolen my identity to give my sister a second shot at youth. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was not going to turn around. I was going inside. I looked for a side entrance. I saw a delivery truck backing up to a service door near the kitchens. The driver was distracted, arguing with someone on a headset. I took a breath. I pulled my coat tighter around me. I slipped through a gap in the hedge and started walking toward the service door. I was Lucy Phillips. I was 33 years old. And I was about to crash my own history. I didn't look back. The time for staying home was over. The time for being unwanted was over. I was here, and I was going to make it weird. The drive deeper into Briar Glen felt less like entering a town and more like crossing the border into a hostile foreign state, where the laws of physics and time had been suspended by a zoning committee. The road curved around the edge of the lake, the water shimmering a dark, slate gray under the overcast sky. Money lived here, quiet, insulated, old money that did not like noise. But today, the quiet had been purchased and paved over. I saw the first banner flapping against a stone wall surrounding a private estate. It was 6 feet long, made of heavy vinyl, secured with zip ties that looked strong enough to hold a suspension bridge. Happy 25th, Lila. The font was a sweeping modern script. The background was a gradient of sunset pinks and champagne golds. It looked like an advertisement for a high-end perfume or a luxury condominium complex, not a birthday greeting. A mile down the road, closer to the venue entrance, I saw the billboard. It was not a permanent structure. It was one of those rented mobile LED screens mounted on the back of a flatbed truck parked strategically on the shoulder. It cycled through 3 images. First, a professional headshot of my sister, airbrushed into unreality, her skin glowing with a terrifying smoothness. Second, the text, a quarter century of brilliance. Third, the hashtag, Lila Launch 25. I slowed my car to a crawl, feeling the blood drumming in my ears. A quarter century, the phrase sat heavy and absurd in my mind. We were 33. We had been alive for 3 decades and 3 years. I remembered our 25th birthday. We had gone to a Mexican restaurant near my old apartment. Lila had cried because she had broken a heel, and I had paid for the margaritas. It had happened. It was a factual event recorded in the bedrock of time. Yet here, in the manicured reality of Briar Glen, that history was being aggressively overwritten. I drove past the billboard, my hands slick on the steering wheel. The entrance to the lake house was a spectacle. The iron gates were draped in garlands of white hydrangeas. A security team, actual uniformed guards with earpieces, not just a teenager with a clipboard, was managing the flow of traffic. I did not turn in. I knew better. My car, a sensible 5-year-old sedan with a dent in the rear bumper, would be flagged immediately. I continued down the road, finding the same spot on the shoulder I had used in my imagination 1,000 times during the drive over. I parked behind a dense thicket of rhododendrons that screened a service road. I killed the engine. The silence of the car felt sudden and heavy. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. I looked pale. My eyes were wide. The pupils dilated with adrenaline. I looked like a woman about to commit a crime, or perhaps solve one. I stepped out into the cool air. The wind off the lake carried the scent of pine needles and expensive catering, grilling meats, truffle oil, the distinct sugary tang of spun sugar. I walked back toward the venue, staying off the pavement, moving through the tree line, through the gaps in the foliage. I could see the main driveway. Guests were arriving in a steady stream. I recognized the cars first. The black Mercedes SUV that belonged to the Gable family, the vintage red convertible that my father's golf partner, Dr. Evans, drove only in dry weather. These were people who had known me since I was a toddler. These were people who had attended my high school graduation. I stopped behind the trunk of a massive oak tree, pressing my back against the rough bark. I watched Dr. Evans step out of his car. He was wearing a tuxedo. His wife was in a silver gown. They looked serious, focused, like they were attending a coronation. Then I saw my cousin, David. David was 3 years older than us. We had spent summers at the same camp. He had taught me how to skip stones on this very lake. He was walking from the parking area toward the main entrance, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up and scanned the perimeter, perhaps checking for the valet. His eyes swept over the tree line. They caught movement. Me. I froze. I expected him to wave. I expected him to look confused. I expected him to call out, "Lucy? What are you doing in the bushes?" Instead, his eyes locked on mine for a single, suspended second. Recognition flashed across his face, and then, with a smoothness that chilled my blood. He looked away. He did not frown. He did not smile. He simply erased me from his field of vision. He turned his head, said something to his wife, and kept walking toward the gate, as if he had seen nothing more than a deer or a stray dog. He had been instructed. The realization hit me harder than the cold wind. This was not just a lie my parents were telling. It was a script everyone else had agreed to follow. My exclusion was part of the dress code. Black tie optional, denial mandatory. I waited until David had passed through the gates before I moved. The front entrance was impossible. I needed the back. I circled the perimeter of the estate, my boots sinking into the soft mulch. The lake house was a sprawling stone mansion designed to look like a historic manor. But I knew from local gossip that it had been built in the 90s. It was all facade, fitting. I found the service entrance near the loading docks. A box truck was idling, the rear liftgate lowered. Men in black t-shirts were unloading crates of glassware. I waited for a moment of distraction. It came when a crate of wine glasses tipped over, shattering with a spectacular crash. The foreman started shouting, and the crew rushed to clean up the shards. I slipped out from the trees and walked briskly toward the open service door. I kept my head down, walking with purpose, holding my phone to my ear as if I were in the middle of a crisis call. "Where is the linen count?" I whispered into the dead phone. "I need the linen count now." No one stopped me. I was a white woman in a black sweater and dark jeans, in the chaos of event production. I looked enough like a coordinator or a florist's assistant to pass. I stepped inside. The kitchen was a war zone of stainless steel and steam. Chefs were shouting orders. Servers were polishing silver. The air was thick with the smell of roasting beef and anxiety. I navigated through the labyrinth of prep tables, keeping my eyes on the floor, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of sculpted butter pats. I made it to a service corridor that led toward the main ballroom. It was quieter here, the floors carpeted in a plush burgundy wool that muffled my footsteps. I heard voices around the corner. I stopped, pressing myself into a recessed alcove that held a vase of decorative twigs. "The lighting is off," a woman's voice said. It was sharp, professional. "We need the amber gels on the spot. Marlene wants the reveal to be warm. She wants golden hour regardless of the actual time." "We are working on it," a man replied. "But the media wall is drawing too much power. We had to reroute." "Fix it," the woman snapped. "The media moment is scheduled for 8 o'clock sharp. If the lighting is bad, the photos are useless. And if the photos are useless, the client is unhappy. You do not want Marlene Phillips unhappy." I held my breath. The media moment, the client. This confirmed what Tessa had said. This was a production. My parents weren't just throwing a party. They were staging a commercial. But for what? What product required a 25-year-old Lila? I waited for the footsteps to fade before I peeled myself away from the wall. I moved deeper into the venue, following the sound of string music. I found myself in a side gallery, a long hallway lined with mirrors that led to the main ballroom. There were no guests here yet. They were all being held in the cocktail area for the reveal. At the end of the gallery stood a large, ornate easel draped in velvet, the seating chart. I walked toward it. My heart was thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew I wouldn't be on it. My father had told me to stay home, but a morbid curiosity pulled me forward. I needed to see the architecture of the exclusion. I needed to see the blank space where I used to be. I scanned the list of names. The calligraphy was beautiful, looping and precise. Table 1. The Phillips family. I read the names listed under the table number. Mr. Grant Phillips, Mrs. Marlene Phillips, Miss Lila Phillips, and then the fourth name. I expected it to be blank. I expected it to be a cousin, or perhaps a grandmother, but it wasn't. Lila's +1, TBD. I stared at the letters. TBD. To be determined. My stomach dropped, a sensation like missing a step on a tall staircase. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited, it was that my seat, the seat that should have belonged to the twin sister, the other half of the dyad, had been converted into a vacancy. I had been replaced by a variable. I was less than a ghost. I was an open slot for a stranger. I reached out and touched the cardstock. It was heavy, textured, expensive. "If she shows up, keep her out of sight." The voice cut through the air like a whip. It came from the other end of the hallway, near a set of double doors. I jerked my hand back and spun around, diving behind a heavy velvet curtain that separated the gallery from a storage alcove. Through the gap in the fabric, I saw my mother. Marlene was pacing in a tight circle, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked terrifyingly elegant. Her dress was a structural marvel of navy silk that made her look like a statue come to life. Her face was set in a grimace of pure stress. "I am not joking," Marlene hissed into the phone. "I have a feeling. She is the type to ruin things. She has always been the difficult one. If you see a Honda Civic, you tow it. I don't care if it is legal. Just get it off the property." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "Yes, the contract people are here," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They are in the green room with Grant. We need the signature before the cake, before the announcement. Everything hinges on the timeline. The contract people?" My mind raced back to the gift basket, the talent agency, the launch. And now, contracts. Were they signing Lila to a modeling deal? An acting gig? But why lie about the age? You couldn't sign a legal contract with a fraudulent age, unless the fraud was the point. Marlene hung up the phone and smoothed the front of her dress. She took a deep breath, composing her face into a mask of serene, maternal joy, and pushed through the double doors into the ballroom. I waited 5 seconds, then followed. I didn't go into the ballroom. I skirted the edge, moving through the catering corridors until I found the door marked Green Room. It was guarded by a young woman with a headset, but she was currently distracted, typing furiously on her phone. I walked past her with my head down, acting like I belonged there, and turned the corner. The door to the green room was slightly ajar. I peered inside. The room was brightly lit, lined with mirrors and makeup chairs. In the center of the room, standing on a small podium, was my sister, Lila. I felt a shock of recognition that was instantly followed by alienation. It was Lila, but it wasn't. She had been restyled. Her hair, usually a dark, wavy brown like mine, had been lightened to a honey blonde and straightened into sleek, glass-like curtains. Her makeup was heavy, contouring her face to look sharper, younger. She was wearing a dress that looked like spun silver, something high fashion and incredibly tight. She looked beautiful. She also looked terrified. She was holding a pose, smiling for a photographer who was snapping rapid-fire shots. "Chin down." "Darling," the photographer shouted. "Eyes bright. Think 25. Think fresh. Think future." Lila's smile trembled at the edges. Her hands were clenched at her sides. She looked like a porcelain doll that was vibrating with a low-frequency panic. "Okay, take 5, the photographer yelled. "We need to reset the lights for the video." The photographer and his assistant bustled out of the room, leaving Lila alone on the podium. She slumped immediately, her shoulders dropping, the smile vanishing like a light switch had been flipped off. She looked exhausted. She looked old. Or rather, she looked her age. She looked 33 and tired. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Lila looked up. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face, leaving the contouring standing out like dark bruises on her skin. "Lucy?" she whispered. I closed the door behind me and locked it. "Hello, birthday girl," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. I felt like I was vibrating apart. Lila scrambled off the podium. She almost tripped on the hem of her silver dress. "You can't be here," she said, her voice high and thin. "Oh my God. Lucy, you have to go. Right now. If Mom sees you—" "I don't care about Mom," I said, walking toward her. "I care about why the entire world thinks we are 25. I care about why my credit card was used to ship champagne to my apartment for you." Lila flinched. She wrapped her arms around herself, the silver sequins scratching against her skin. "I didn't know about the card," she said quickly. "I swear, Mom handles the logistics. I just show up where they tell me." "You are 33, Lila," I said. I stood in front of her. We were the same height. We had the same face. But right now, looking at her was like looking into a distorted mirror. "Why are you doing this? Why are you letting them erase 8 years of our lives?" Lila looked at the door, then back at me. Her eyes were darting back and forth, like a trapped animal looking for a vent. "It is complicated," she whispered. "It is not complicated," I said. "It is a lie." It is not just a lie, she hissed, stepping closer. Her breath smelled of mints and nervous bile. You don't understand. It is the only way. The only way to what? I asked. To get famous? To be an influencer? Is that what this is? You want to be a TikTok star so bad you are willing to commit fraud? Lila laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. Famous? Lucy, look at me. I am a receptionist. I have a degree in art history. I never use. I have debt. I have so much debt. She grabbed my arm. Her fingers were cold. It is not about fame, she said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. It is the paperwork. The trust. The trust? I asked. What trust? Before she could answer, the handle of the door jiggled. Then it turned. Locked? A male voice said from the hallway. Why is it locked? Grant. Lila's face went white. She let go of my arm and backed away, putting the podium between us. Please, she mouthed. Go. I didn't move. I turned to face the door. A key rattled in the lock. The tumbler clicked. The door swung open. My father stood in the doorway. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my car. He looked impeccable. He looked calm. He saw me, and his expression did not change. There was no surprise. There was no anger. There was only a cold, flat disappointment, as if he had found a stain on the carpet. Lucy, he said. Hello? Dad? I said. Grant stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He did not lock it this time. He didn't need to. His presence filled the small space, sucking out the oxygen. I thought we had an agreement, he said pleasantly. He walked over to a table and poured himself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. You ordered me to stay home, I said. That is not an agreement. That is a command. Grant took a sip of water. He looked at Lila, who was trembling by the podium. Lila, honey, fix your face, he said gently. You are smudging your eyeliner. The guests are waiting. Lila immediately reached for a tissue and began dabbing at her eyes, her movements jerky and obedient. Grant turned his attention back to me. He smiled. It was the smile he used when he was returning a bottle of wine at a restaurant. Polite, firm, and menacing. You are unwell. Lucy, he said, I am not unwell. I said, I am confused. I am asking why my sister is pretending to be 25. You are having an episode, Grant continued, ignoring my words entirely. You have always been high-strung. You get jealous of your sister's success, and you invent these narratives. It is sad. Really. We wanted to protect you from the stress of tonight. That is why we didn't invite you. Stop gaslighting me, I said, my voice rising. I saw the invitation. I saw the date. I saw the credit card charges. Lila just told me it is about a trust. Grant's eyes flickered. It was a micro-expression, a tiny tightening of the muscles around the eyes. But I caught it. I had struck a nerve. He set the glass down. Lila is confused, he said smoothly. She is under a lot of pressure, and you are disturbing her. He walked toward me. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, inevitable momentum of a glacier. It is time for you to leave, he said. I am not leaving until I get answers. I said, planting my feet. Grant reached out and took my arm. His grip was shocking. It wasn't the grip of a father. It was the grip of a bouncer. His fingers dug into the soft tissue of my upper arm, hitting the bone. You are leaving, he said. His voice was no longer pleasant. It was a low growl. He began to steer me toward the door. I dug my heels into the carpet. Let go of me, I said. Lila made a small noise of distress, but she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched, her eyes wide and wet. As our father manhandled me, Grant didn't stop. He was stronger than me, fueled by a lifetime of absolute authority. He marched me to the door, his grip bruising. Listen to me. Lucy, he said, his mouth close to my ear. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale coffee. If you interfere with tonight, if you make a scene, if you so much as whisper the wrong number to a guest, you will lose what little you still have from us. I struggled against him. What do I have? I gasped. You treat me like I'm dead already. I am talking about the safety net, Grant whispered. I am talking about your co-signed lease. I am talking about the emergency fund. I am talking about your ability to exist in this world without us crushing you. Do not test me. He shoved me into the hallway. I stumbled. Catching myself against the wall, I turned back, breathless and shaking. Grant stood in the doorway, filling the frame. Behind him, Lila was retouching her lipstick, her hand trembling violently. Go home. Lucy, Grant said. He closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, clutching my arm where he had grabbed me. The pain was sharp, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I was shaking. My entire body was vibrating with a mixture of joy and terror. The threat had been real. They controlled things I hadn't even thought about. My lease, old financial ties I hadn't severed. I turned and ran. I didn't run to the ballroom. I didn't run to the guests. I ran back the way I came, through the kitchen, past the startled chefs, out the service door, and into the night. The cold air hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I stumbled through the darkness back to my car, my boots sliding on the damp grass. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I sat there, breathing hard, my hands gripping the wheel until they hurt. I should go home. That was the smart thing to do. That was the safe thing to do. But I couldn't go home. The image of Lila's terrified face, the phrase, "It's the paperwork," and my father's cold, violent grip wouldn't let me. The trust. Lila had mentioned a trust. But we didn't have a trust. Our grandparents had died with debt. Our parents lived well. But they were leveraged to the hilt, keeping up appearances in a town they couldn't quite afford. Unless there was something I didn't know, something hidden in the past. I started the car. I didn't turn toward the highway. I didn't turn toward the city. I turned toward town. Briar Glen was a small place. It had secrets, but it also had records. And there was one place in town that I still associated with the truth. One place where biology couldn't be edited by a marketing team. The Briar Glen Community Clinic. It was where we had gone for our shots. It was where we had been treated for the chicken pox when we were 7. It was where the physical proof of our existence, our true, chronological existence, had been filed away in beige folders. If there was a lie about our age, the truth was in those files. And if there was a trust tied to that age, the timeline would be the key. I put the car in gear and drove away from the lake, leaving the music and the lights behind. I was done with the party. I was done with the show. I was going to find the original script. The Briar Glen Community Clinic was a low brick building situated between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner that had been closed for 5 years. It was the only medical facility in town that wasn't a boutique cosmetic surgery center or a concierge practice. It was where the normal people went. It was where Lila and I had gone for 33 years, until my parents decided our history needed editing. I parked my car under the flickering halogen of a street lamp. My arm still throbbed where my father had grabbed me. I rubbed the spot, feeling the heat radiating through my sweater. The physical pain was grounding. It was proof that what happened at the lake house was real, that the tuxedo and the silver dress and the lie were not just a hallucination. The waiting room was empty, smelling of rubbing alcohol and old magazines. The receptionist was a woman I didn't recognize, younger than the matrons who used to staff the desk when I was a child. She was scrolling on her phone, the blue light illuminating her bored expression. She looked up as I approached the sliding glass window. "Help you?" she asked. "I need to request a copy of my medical records," I said. My voice sounded scraped raw. "And my sisters, Lucy and Lila Phillips." The girl typed something into her computer. She paused. She typed again, harder this time, hitting the enter key with unnecessary force. Then she stopped. Her eyes flicked up to my face, then back to the screen. "Phillips?" she asked. "As in the twins?" "Yes," I said. "As in the twins." Her demeanor shifted instantly. It wasn't the warm recognition of a small-town neighbor. It was the guarded, slightly panicked reaction of someone who had been given a very specific memo. She pushed her chair back slightly. "We don't hold those files here anymore," she said. Her voice was rehearsed. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We have been patients here since 1993. Administrative transfer," she said, not meeting my eyes. "All records for the Phillips family were moved to a private archival service 3 years ago. We don't have access." "Where were they moved?" I demanded. She scribbled a name and a number on a sticky note and slid it across the counter. She didn't hand it to me. She pushed it until it was just barely within my reach. As if she didn't want to touch me. "Brookvale Record Services," she said. "You have to call them. We can't help you." She closed the glass window before I could ask another question. I walked back to my car, clutching the sticky note. I turned on the overhead light and stared at the number. Brookvale Record Services. It sounded like a shell company. It sounded like a place where paper went to die. I dialed the number. I expected a voicemail, considering it was evening, but a call center picked up on the second ring. "Brookvale Services. Identity verification required," a robotic male voice said. "I am calling about the files for Lucy and Lila Phillips." I said, "I am Lucy Phillips." There was a pause, followed by the clicking of keys. "Access to the twin file is restricted," the operator said. The term sent a chill down my spine. The twin file, not the files. One file, singular. As if we were a single organism that had been split in two. "Restricted by whom?" I asked. "It is my medical history. I have a legal right to see it. The file is under a curative seal," the operator recited. "Access requires a notarized consent form from the primary family representative." "And who is the primary family representative?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Mr. Grant Phillips," the operator said. I hung up. My parents hadn't just lied about our age. They had privatized our history. They had moved our medical reality into a vault that only my father held the key to. I started the car. I needed something official. I needed a document that didn't care about curative seals or private archives. I needed the government. The county clerk's office was in the center of Briar Glen, a 10-minute drive away. It would be closed. Of course, it was night, but the county had recently installed an automated records kiosk in the vestibule of the Civic Building, a detail I remembered from a newsletter my mother had once mocked for being too pedestrian. I drove toward the town square. I called the county's automated records line on the way. Putting it on speaker, I navigated the menu, entering my social security number and date of birth. "Record located," the automated voice said. "Please note, this record contains 3 amendments." I nearly drove off the road. 3 amendments. A birth certificate is not a rough draft. It is a record of a biological fact. You do not amend it 3 times unless you are correcting a catastrophic error or committing a catastrophic fraud. I pulled up to the curb outside the Civic Building. The square was quiet, the old brick courthouse illuminated by floodlights. I got out of the car, intending to storm the kiosk, when I saw a figure standing near the bottom of the stone steps. It was Wanda. Wanda lived 3 houses down from my parents. She was a widow in her 70s who walked her corgi at odd hours because she had insomnia. She was wearing a heavy wool coat and watching the dog sniff a patch of ornamental ivy. She looked up as I slammed my car door. "Lucy?" she called out, squinting against the glare of the street lamp. "Is that you?" I froze. I hadn't seen Wanda in 2 years. I walked over to her. "Hi, Wanda," I said. She looked at me, then looked at the car, then looked back at my face. She seemed uneasy. "I thought you would be at the party," she said. "The big bash at the lake. Your mother has been talking about it for months. I wasn't invited." I said flatly, "I am too old." Wanda frowned. She adjusted her scarf. "Too old? But it is a birthday party. It is a 25th birthday party." "Wanda," I said, "Lila and I are 33. Wanda went still. She looked down at the dog. She tightened her grip on the leash. "Oh," she said softly, "so they are really doing that. Then? You knew?" I asked, stepping closer. Wanda sighed. It was a heavy, rattling sound. "Lucy, honey, everyone knows your parents are particular. They have always told stories, This isn't a story. Wanda, I said, they have amended my birth certificate. They have locked my medical records. Why? Wanda looked around the empty square, as if checking for eavesdroppers. I don't know the why, she said, but I always thought the twin story was complicated. What do you mean, complicated? Wanda hesitated. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. I remember when you were babies, she said. I remember when they brought you home. But before that, months before that, there was a woman? A woman? I asked. She used to come by the house. Wanda said. She drove a beat-up blue sedan. She would park 2 streets over, on Maple, and walk to your parents' door. She would stay for an hour, and then she would leave. She was always crying. I felt a sudden, sharp prick of memory, a flash of blue metal, a woman with red hair standing on the front porch, my mother's hand on my shoulder, turning me away from the window. Don't stare, Lucy. It is rude to stare. I remember her. I whispered, Who was she? I don't know, Wanda said, but the last time I saw her was a week before your parents announced the twins had arrived, and then I never saw her again. The dog tugged at the leash, barking at a shadow. Wanda jumped. I should go, she said nervously. I shouldn't be talking about this. Your father. He has a long reach in this town. Lucy. She turned and hurried away, the corgis scrambling to keep up. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind biting through my sweater, a crying woman, a blue car, a week before we arrived. The implication made my stomach turn, but I pushed it down. I couldn't speculate. I needed proof, and if the county office was closed, and the clinic was a dead end, there was only one place left where the paper trail might still exist. My childhood home. They were all at the party. My mother was directing the lighting. My father was managing the contracts. Lila was playing the role of the debutante. The house on Elm Street would be empty. I got back in the car. The drive to my parents' house took 15 minutes. I turned off my headlights as I turned onto their street, coasting to a stop 3 houses down, ironically, right where Wanda said the crying woman used to park. The house loomed in the darkness. It was a large, colonial revival with white pillars and black shutters. It looked perfect. It looked like the kind of house where nothing bad ever happened. I walked up the driveway, sticking to the grass to avoid the crunch of gravel. I circled around to the back door, the one that led into the mudroom. I reached up to the top of the doorframe. My fingers brushed against dust and peeling paint until I felt the cold metal of a key. I almost laughed. It was so arrogant. They hadn't changed the hiding spot in 20 years. They didn't think anyone would break in. Or perhaps, more cruelly, they didn't think I would ever have the courage to violate their space. They thought they had trained the rebellion out of me. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth click. I stepped inside. The house smelled the same as it always did. Lemon polish, expensive candles, and a sterile lack of humidity. It was silent. I didn't turn on the lights. I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the beam low. I moved through the kitchen, past the gleaming marble island where we weren't allowed to eat breakfast because it might stain, and into the hallway. I headed straight for my father's study. The door was closed. I opened it. The room was lined with bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes that had never been read. My father's desk was a massive slab of mahogany, completely clear of papers. Grant Phillips did not leave clutter. I went to the closet. I knew there was a safe, a heavy digital thing bolted to the floor. I didn't have the combination for that, but I also knew my father's filing habits. He was a man who believed in categories. He believed that if you labeled something boring enough, no one would look at it. I opened the closet door. The shelves were stacked with banker's boxes, holiday decor, manuals, warranties. I scanned the labels until I found the one I remembered from my childhood snooping. Taxes. It was on the bottom shelf, a gray, fireproof lockbox. I pulled it out. It was heavy. It was locked with a small silver padlock. I looked around the closet. My father wouldn't keep the key on his person. He would keep it close to the box, but hidden in plain sight. I ran my hand under the metal lip of the shelf above. Nothing. I checked the inside of the holiday decor box. Nothing. Then I saw it. An old label maker sticker on the shelf support that read 1998. I peeled it back. Taped to the underside of the sticker was a tiny silver key. My hands were shaking as I peeled the tape away. I sat on the floor, the flashlight beam dancing nervously across the carpet, and inserted the key into the lockbox. It clicked open. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no chaotic jumble of papers. There were neat, color-coded folders. I pulled out the first one. It was blue. The cover sheet was thick. Bonded paper. The Hallomere Family Trust. I had never heard of the Hallomere Family Trust. My grandparents were named Phillips and Miller. Hallomere sounded like a gated community or a fictional duchy. I flipped the page. I scanned the legalese, my eyes burning in the dim light. I skipped the preambles and definitions, hunting for the triggers. And then I found it. Section 4, Paragraph B. Conditions of disbursement. The principal sum of the trust shall be made available to the beneficiary upon the public designation of their 25th year, provided said designation occurs prior to the actual chronological age of 26. I read it again. Provided said designation occurs prior to the actual chronological age of 26. The language was twisted, specific. It didn't say, when the beneficiary turns 25. It said, upon the public designation. It was a loophole designed for fraud. It was a legal mechanism that essentially said, if you can convince the world you are 25, you get the money. I looked at the designated beneficiary. Ms. Lila Phillips. Current age. Listed, 25. I felt sick. This was it. This was the engine driving the party. The billboard. The launch. There was money. Likely millions. Given the complexity of the trust, sitting behind a gate that only opened for a 25-year-old. Since Lila was 33, they had to construct a reality where she wasn't. But where was I? I rifled through the rest of the folder. I found a sub-document titled Contingent Liabilities. My name jumped out at me. Guarantor. Lucy Phillips. I flipped the page to the signature line. There, in blue ink, was my name. The loops of the L and the Y were sweeping and graceful. They were also fake. I looked at the date next to the signature. It was dated 3 weeks ago. I had been at work that day. I had been sitting in a cubicle, eating a salad, while someone, my mother, my father, forged my name to guarantee the catering costs for the party I wasn't allowed to attend. I was the insurance policy. If the scheme failed, if the trust didn't pay out, if the creditors came calling for the champagne and the venue and the billboard, the debt wouldn't fall on Lila. It wouldn't fall on Grant or Marlene. It would fall on me. I dug deeper into the box. I found a thin, red folder at the very back. The label was handwritten in my father's block lettering. Lucy, do not discuss. I opened it. There was only a single sheet of paper inside. It was a letter from a law office I didn't recognize, dated 6 months ago. Estate of Eleanor Vance. Dear Mr. Phillips, we are in receipt of the voluntary relinquishment form signed by your daughter, Lucy Phillips. This document formally seizes her standing regarding the Vance estate. As such, the entirety of the inheritance will default to the sole remaining heir, Lila Phillips, effective immediately. Eleanor Vance. The name triggered a faint, dusty memory. She was an aunt? A distant cousin? I didn't know. I had never met her. But apparently, she had left me something, an inheritance, and apparently, I had voluntarily relinquished it. I stared at the paper. I had never signed a relinquishment form. I had never even known there was an estate to relinquish. It was a total liquidation of my existence. They hadn't just stolen my credit score. They had stolen my inheritance, my legal standing, and my voice. They had systematically stripped me of every asset I didn't even know I had, funneling it all into the golden vessel that was Lila. I sat back against the closet door, the papers scattered on the floor around me like debris from a crash. I thought about the years of helping out, the times my father had slid a stack of papers across the dinner table and said, just routine insurance forms. Lucy, sign here, here, and here. The times my mother had said, don't worry your pretty little head about the details. Just sign so we can get you on the dental plan. I had signed. I had always signed. Because I wanted them to love me. Because I wanted to be easy. Because I thought if I was compliant enough, they would finally let me into the picture. But they were never going to let me in. The picture was designed to keep me out. I looked at the Halomere Trust document again, the public designation clause. The party wasn't just a party, it was the public designation, the cameras, the media moment, the live stream. It was all evidence. They needed to prove to the trustees that Lila was publicly accepted as 25. The signing ceremony. I remembered Marlene on the phone in the hallway. The contract people are here. They weren't signing a modeling contract. They were signing the trust release. They were going to do it tonight, in front of witnesses, under the guise of a legacy initiative, and once that ink was dry, the money would move, Lila would be rich, my parents' debts would be cleared, and I would be left with the bill. I gathered the papers. I didn't put them back in the box. I stuffed them into my tote bag, the trust agreement, the forged guarantor forms, the relinquishment letter. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was razor sharp. I wasn't going to go home and cry. I wasn't going to call a lawyer in the morning. I was going back to the party. I checked my phone. It was 8:15. The media moment was scheduled for 8 o'clock. I might be too late for the photos, but the signing, the big surprise, would be the finale. That usually happened before the cake. I had time. I walked out of the study, leaving the closet door open and the empty lockbox on the floor. Let them see it. Let them know the ghost had walked through walls. I left the house and got back into my car. I placed the tote bag on the passenger seat. It sat there, heavy and accusatory. I drove fast. The road to the lake was dark, twisting through the trees. I didn't feel the fear anymore. I felt a cold, hard purpose. I thought about Lila. It is not just the age. It is the paperwork. She knew. She was terrified. Yes, but she was going to sign. She was going to stand there in her silver dress and let them erase me for a payout. I thought about the crying woman in the blue car, the woman who came before we arrived. There was a rot at the center of this family, deeper than money. But tonight, I was going to cut out the money part. I was going to sever the financial artery that kept the beast alive. I saw the lights of the lake house glowing through the trees. The bass of the music was louder now. The party was in full swing. I didn't park in the bushes this time. I drove straight up to the main gate. The security guard stepped out, holding up a hand. "Name?" he asked, looking at my battered sedan with disdain. "Lucy Phillips," I said. He checked his clipboard. "You are not on the list." "Ma'am." "I know," I said. I reached into the tote bag and pulled out the Halomere Trust document. I held it up. "But I have the paperwork the client is waiting for." The guard hesitated. He looked at the document. It looked official. He looked at me. I didn't look like a party crasher anymore. I looked like a lawyer who had run out of patience. "Go ahead," he said. Stepping back, I drove through the gates. I was done hiding in the dark. I was done being the secret. I parked the car right in front of the entrance, blocking a Rolls-Royce. I grabbed my bag. I walked up the steps to the double doors. I was coming in, and I was bringing the truth with me. I sat in my car, the engine idling, the heater blowing lukewarm air against my frozen hands. The Rolls-Royce parked in front of me was a towering wall of polished black steel, a physical barrier between me and the party. But the real barrier was sitting on my passenger seat. The tote bag sagged open, revealing the corner of the red folder. "Lucy, do not discuss." I picked up the folder. I pulled out the letter regarding the estate of Eleanor Vance. The paper was crisp, high-quality linen stock. It felt authoritative. It felt final. Voluntary relinquishment. The phrase echoed in my head, dragging a chain of memories with it. I closed my eyes and saw the kitchen table of my childhood home. I saw the way the afternoon light used to hit the grain of the wood. I saw my father's hand, large and manicured, sliding a piece of paper toward me, just a formality. "Lucy." I remembered being 18, packing for college. My mother had come into my room with a clipboard. "Insurance updates. Sweetheart, We need to make sure you are covered in the dorms. Sign here. And here. I had signed, grateful that she was thinking of my safety. I remembered being 24. I had just been laid off from my first job. I was crying in the living room. My father had poured me a drink and handed me a pen. We are moving some assets around to help you with rent. Lucy, just an acknowledgement of receipt. Sign here. I had signed. I had always signed. I had signed because I wanted to be the daughter who didn't cause trouble. I had signed because I believed that if I made myself legally permeable, they would finally let me in. I looked at the letter in my hand. They hadn't been helping me. They had been harvesting me. Every signature had been a brick removed from my own foundation and placed onto Lila's. I looked at the phone number on the letterhead. It was a local area code, but the office was listed as Harrow Associates. It was 8:30 at night. No one should be answering. But I remembered what I had heard in the hallway. The contract people are here. If they were at the venue, or managing the deal from afar, someone might be manning the phones. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Then, a click. Harrow and Associates. Litigation support. It was a young man's voice, distracted. Background noise behind him. He sounded like he was eating. "Hi," I said, pitching my voice to be brisk and annoyed. "This is the Phillips account. I am calling to confirm the file status before the signing ceremony. We are having an issue with the dates." The young man chewed for a second, then swallowed. "Oh, right. The Phillips file. Hold on." He typed something. I heard the clacking of a mechanical keyboard. "I have the file open," he said. "We are just waiting for the final execution of the Hallowmere disbursement. What is the issue with the date?" "It is the relinquishment form for the other sister." I said. I forced my voice to remain steady. "The date on the copy we have here is smudged. I need to know when that was filed. We need to make sure it clears the 6-month statute." I held my breath. It was a gamble. I didn't know if there was a statute. I was throwing words at a wall. "Right. Let me check," he said. "Okay. The voluntary relinquishment for Lucy Phillips regarding the Vance estate. That was filed and notarized on August 14th of last year. August, 6 months ago." My hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. August 14th. I remembered that day. I was at a mandatory training seminar for work. I was nowhere near a notary. I was nowhere near my parents. "So it is recent," I said. My voice was a whisper. "Yeah, it is fresh." The paralegal said, "You are well within the window. The sister is totally cleared out of the line of succession. You are good to go for the trust triggers tonight. Thank you." I said. I hung up. I sat there, staring at the dashboard. It wasn't an old mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding from childhood. They had forged my signature 6 months ago. They had actively, recently, and criminally erased me to clear the path for Lila. The party suddenly took on a sickening, dual clarity. It wasn't just about Lila turning 25 to trigger the money. It was about me not being there. If I was there, if I was visible, if I was asking questions, the narrative of the estranged, relinquished sister would crumble. My absence was a line item in their budget. My silence was an asset they had already leveraged. I looked at the venue. The lights were blazing. The music was thumping. Inside that building, my family was selling my existence to buy a future for Lila. I picked up my phone again. I opened my text thread with Lila. The last message was from 3 months ago. "Happy birthday." I had written. She had replied with a heart emoji. I took a photo of the Hallowmere trust document. I made sure the clause about the under 26 requirement was in focus. I attached the photo. I typed a single question. "Did you know about this?" I hit send. I watched the screen. Delivered. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I could imagine her inside. She would be holding her phone, maybe checking her makeup in the camera app, maybe hiding in the bathroom. She would see the notification. She would see the document that proved she wasn't just a birthday girl, but a co-conspirator. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. 3 dots appeared again. The phone buzzed. I didn't at first. Now I do. "I am sorry." I stared at the words. "I am sorry." It was the most devastating thing she could have written. If she had denied it, I could have been angry. If she had attacked me, I could have fought back, but I'm sorry was an admission. It was a confirmation that she knew exactly what was happening, and she was doing it anyway. She was choosing the money over me. She was choosing the lie over the twin. I let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a jagged, ugly noise in the quiet car. I felt a profound, hollowing grief. I had spent 33 years waiting for Lila to stand up for me. I had spent my life defending her helplessness, telling myself that she was just soft, that she needed protection. But she wasn't helpless. She was expensive. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. The grief was heavy, but it was also clarifying. The fantasy was dead. The sister I thought I had didn't exist. There was only Ms. Lila Phillips, beneficiary, age 25. I needed to secure the perimeter. I couldn't save the relationship, so I had to save myself. I dialed the number on the back of my debit card. I navigated the automated menu with a cold. Mechanical precision, report fraud, speak to a representative. A woman named Karen answered. I need to report identity theft. I said, okay, ma'am. Karen said, we can certainly help with that. Are there specific charges you are concerned about? Yes, I said. But first, I need to flag an unauthorized user. I gave her my information. I gave her the account details. I see the user here. Karen said, Lila Phillips, added last month. I did not authorize that. I said, and I need to know the email address used to verify the addition. One moment, Karen said. I waited. I looked out the window at the security guard, who was now checking a clipboard for another car. Okay, Karen said. The verification email was sent to Marlene Phillips, design@email.com. I closed my eyes, hearing it out loud, from a stranger, made it final. My mother had hacked my life to fund my sister's party. Remove the user, I said, freeze the card, and flag the account for fraud. I am filing a police report in the morning. Are you sure you want to proceed with a full fraud investigation? Karen asked. This will involve contacting the other user and the email holder. I am sure. I said. I hung up. The bridge was burned. I had just lit the match. There was no going back to Thanksgiving dinners or awkward Christmas mornings. I had just criminalized my mother. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of having nothing left to lose. I looked at the venue again. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to drive away and let them sign the papers. I wanted clarity. I wanted Lila to look me in the eye and tell me why. I wanted to hear it from her mouth, not through a text message, not filtered through our father's threats, and I wanted witnesses. My father's greatest weapon had always been privacy. He thrived in the closed room, the hushed conversation, the gaslighting that happened when no one else was watching. He couldn't twist the reality if there was an audience. I grabbed my tote bag. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked pale, but my eyes were dry. I didn't look crazy. I looked determined. I got out of the car. I walked past the Rolls-Royce. I walked up the wide stone steps. The security guard I had shown the papers to earlier was busy with a delivery driver. He glanced at me, saw the tote bag, and nodded. Assuming I was the lawyer or the courier I had claimed to be, I walked through the double doors. The noise hit me first, a wall of sound, pop music, laughter, the clinking of glass, then the heat. The room was packed. It was a ballroom straight out of a magazine. Chandeliers dripped with crystals. The tables were draped in champagne silk. A massive floral installation hung from the ceiling, spelling out Lila in white roses. I stood in the entryway, scanning the room. I saw faces I knew. Neighbors, old teachers, distant relatives. They were all smiling, drinking free champagne, participating in the illusion. I didn't see my parents. They were likely backstage, preparing for the moment. I needed to find Lila. I moved through the crowd. I didn't make eye contact. I moved like a shark, cutting through the current of bodies. I checked the bar. No. I checked the dance floor. No. I saw a waiter coming out of a side corridor carrying a fresh tray of drinks. The corridor was roped off with a velvet stanchion. VIP. Access only. I slipped under the rope. The corridor was quieter. It led toward the restrooms and the bridal suite. I heard a voice. Please, I can't do it. I feel sick. It was Lila. I followed the sound. It was coming from a small alcove near the emergency exit, a place where the staff stored extra chairs. I turned the corner. Lila was sitting on a stack of folding chairs, her head in her hands. She looked like a collapsed star in her silver dress. Lila, I said. She jerked her head up. Her eyes were red. Her makeup was ruined. Lucy? She gasped. She stood up, backing away until she hit the wall. You came back? Grant said you left. He said you were having a breakdown. Grant lies. I said, I held up the tote bag. I know about the trust. Lila, I know about the Hallomere payout. I know about the under 26 clause. Lila began to cry. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a heaving, ugly sobbing. You don't understand. She choked out. Then tell me, I said. I stepped closer. I am done being the only one who doesn't know the plot. Why are you doing this? Why are you letting them erase me? Is the money that important? Lila shook her head violently. It is not for me, she cried. I don't get the money. Lucy. What? I asked. Lila wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing highlighter across her cheek. The debt, she whispered. They have debt. Huge debt. Dad made bad investments 3 years ago. He leveraged everything. The house, the cars, the business. She took a shaking breath. And he leveraged me. I stared at her. What do you mean? He took out loans in my name. Lila said, student loans, personal loans. He used my credit because his was shot. I didn't know until the collectors started calling. It is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lucy, if I don't pay it, I go to jail, or I go bankrupt. I felt the floor tilt. So the trust? I started. The trust is the bailout, Lila said. It is the only thing that covers the nut. But the clause was written when we were kids. It expires at 26. So they rewrote time, I said. Lila nodded. They hired the agency. They faked the birth certificate. They made me dye my hair. They said if I just played the part for one night, if I just signed the papers as a 25-year-old, the trust would clear, the debts would vanish, and I would be free. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. If I don't do this, they will sink me. Lucy, they said it would be my fault. They said I would be the one who destroyed the family. I looked at my sister. I saw the way she was hugging herself, her knuckles white. I saw the way her eyes kept darting to the door, terrified that Grant would walk in. I recognized that look. I had worn that look for 33 years. It wasn't greed. It was a hostage situation. She wasn't the golden child. She was the scapegoat with a better paint job. My anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp pity. And then, a different kind of anger. A protective, burning rage directed entirely at the two people who had pitted us against each other. Lila, I said softly, they are not going to free you. She blinked. What? If you sign that paper, I said, you are committing fraud, major fraud, and once you do that, they own you forever. You think they will pay off the debt? Or do you think they will use the money for a new house, a new car, and keep the debt hanging over your head so you never talk? Lila went still. The logic landed. She knew our parents. She knew their patterns. But what can I do? She whispered. The contract people are here. The cameras are out there. We stop it. I said. How? She asked. Grant will kill me. Not if everyone is watching. I said. Just then, the music in the ballroom swelled. It changed from a dance beat to a triumphant, orchestral fanfare. I heard Marlene's voice booming over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please gather around the main stage. We have a very special surprise. Lila flinched. She looked like she was about to vomit. It is time. She whispered. I grabbed her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Come with me. I said. Where? She asked. To the surprise? I said. I pulled her out of the alcove. We walked back down the corridor. We emerged into the ballroom. The lights had been dimmed. focusing on a raised platform at the far end of the room. The setup was elaborate. There was a branded backdrop, Lila's legacy. There was a table draped in velvet. There was a ring light setup, and a camera crew positioning a boom mic. Marlene was standing on the stage, holding a microphone. She looked radiant and terrifying. Grant was standing next to her, smiling his shark smile. They were waiting for Lila. I tightened my grip on Lila's hand. She tried to pull away, but I held on. "We are not going to the stage," I whispered. "We are going to the side." I saw Tessa near the bar. She had arrived. She was looking around, looking worried. I steered Lila toward the edge of the crowd. Using the shadows, Marlene's voice rang out. "Tonight is not just about a birthday," she announced. "It is about the future. It is about launching the next chapter of the Phillips legacy." The crowd cheered. I looked at the stage. I saw the paralegal I had spoken to, or someone who looked like him, standing near the table with a leather folder. They were going to do it live. They were going to make her sign the fraud in front of 200 people and call it a legacy initiative. I looked at Lila. "Do you trust me?" I asked. Lila looked at me. She looked at our parents on the stage. She looked at the lie she was wearing. "I don't know," she whispered. "That is fair," I said. "But you don't have to trust me. You just have to tell the truth when I ask you." I saw Wanda standing near a pillar, holding a glass of wine, looking uncomfortable. "Perfect." I let go of Lila's hand. "Stay here," I said. "When I start talking, don't run. Just breathe." I stepped away from the wall. I checked the tote bag one last time. The documents were there. The proof was there. Marlene raised her glass. "And now, let's welcome the woman of the hour, the birthday girl, Lila." The spotlight swept the room, searching for the silver dress. It found her. Lila froze, caught in the beam like a deer on the highway. But I stepped into the light, too. I wasn't in a silver dress. I was in jeans and a sweater. I was holding a tote bag full of evidence, and I was walking toward the microphone. The spotlight swept past me, a blinding wash of white heat that lasted for a fraction of a second before locking onto the shimmering silver figure of my sister. The crowd roared. The applause was a physical weight, a wall of sound that pushed me back into the shadows of the periphery. I had stepped forward with the intent to speak, to disrupt the narrative right there and then. But the machine of the party was too efficient, too loud. The moment the light hit Lila, the room pivoted. I was not the disruption. I was merely a shadow in the corner of the frame, unseen by the cameras that were now zooming in on the birthday girl. Marlene stood at the center of the stage, the microphone gripped in her hand like a scepter. She waited for the applause to die down, her smile fixed and radiant, the kind of smile that didn't crease her eyes. She looked out at the sea of faces, the neighbors, the local dignitaries, the people who mattered to her social standing, and she began to speak. "We are so incredibly blessed," Marlene said. Her voice amplified and rich with manufactured emotion. "To have a daughter like Lila is to know what true devotion looks like, in a world where families drift apart, where children leave and forget where they came from. Lila has been our rock." I stood near a pillar, my tote bag heavy on my shoulder, and felt the words land like darts. "She is the daughter who stayed close," Marlene continued, her voice trembling with a perfect, practiced vibrato. "She is the one who never abandoned family for the allure of the city or the selfishness of a career that keeps you too busy to call. She understands that legacy isn't about what you build for yourself, but what you preserve for the people who love you." I looked around the room. Heads were nodding. People were dabbing at their eyes. My mother was rewriting history in real time, and she was doing it with a masterstroke of cruelty. She wasn't just praising Lila. She was explaining my absence. I wasn't there because I was the bad daughter. I was the one who left. I was the one who abandoned them. My exclusion from the party wasn't an act of parental aggression. It was a consequence of my own moral failure. It was brilliant. It was hateful. And it was working. Marlene gestured to Lila, who was standing a few feet away, looking like a deer caught in high beams. "Tonight, we celebrate not just her 25th birthday, but her heart, Marlene said, "The heart of the family." She lowered the microphone, and the room erupted again. I watched Lila. She didn't look like the heart of anything. She looked like a hostage who had been dressed in expensive silk. She offered a weak wave to the crowd, her smile trembling so violently I thought it might slide off her face. Then, the tone shifted. The emotional preamble was over. It was time for the business. A man stepped out from the wings. He was slick, wearing a suit that was too tight and shoes that were too shiny. He carried a distinct air of transaction. I recognized the logo on the lapel pin of his jacket, a stylized starling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant announced, stepping up to the microphone as Marlene stepped back. "Please welcome Mr. Julian Thorne from Starling and Company." Thorne took the mic. He had the energy of a game show host. "What a night!" he shouted, pointing a finger at the crowd. "What a night for Briar Glen!" At Starling, we look for that special spark, that undeniable youth and vitality that speaks to the next generation, and we found it right here. He turned to Lila. "We are thrilled to announce a new exclusive partnership," he said, "to celebrate Lila's fresh start at 25. Starling and Company will be managing her brand rollout across all major platforms. This is just the beginning of a quarter-century celebration that is going to take the world by storm." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. A brand rollout, a partnership. This wasn't just a lie to get a trust payout. They were monetizing the fraud. They were building a commercial entity on top of a fake birth date. If Lila signed that contract, if she accepted money based on being 25, she wasn't just lying to our parents or a trustee. She was defrauding investors. She was walking into a federal crime. Grant stepped back to the mic. He looked commanding, the patriarch in his prime. "And to cement this new chapter," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, reverent register, "we have one more surprise, a surprise that ensures the Phillips name and Lila's future are secure for generations to come." 2 staff members carried a long, antique table onto the stage. It was draped in blue velvet. Another staff member placed a single, heavy document in the center. Alongside a gold fountain pen, cameras on tripods moved closer. The ring lights intensified. I recognized the leather folder on the table. It matched the one I had found in the lockbox. It was the Hallowmere Trust Agreement. "We call this the Family Legacy Initiative," Grant said. "It is a commitment, a promise, and tonight, you are all witnesses to the signing." The crowd murmured with appreciation. They didn't know they were watching a heist. They thought they were watching a wealthy family do wealthy family things. I knew I had seconds. The stage was set. The trap was armed. If I shouted from the back of the room now, while the emotional high was peaking, I would look like the jealous, unstable sister my mother had just painted me to be. Security would drag me out, and the signing would happen anyway. I needed to stop the hand that held the pen. I pushed off the pillar. I didn't run. I moved with a focused, terrifying calm. I weaved through the guests, ignoring the looks of confusion from people who half recognized me. I reached the side of the stage just as Grant was stepping down to escort Lila up the stairs. I intercepted him. I reached out and gripped his forearm. The fabric of his tuxedo was smooth, cold. "Dad," I said. Grant stopped. He looked down at my hand, then up at my face. His expression didn't flicker. It was a mask of absolute control. "You are causing a scene," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the swelling music. "I am not causing a scene yet," I said. I pulled him slightly closer. Forcing him to look at me, I went to the house. "Dad, I used the spare key." His eyes narrowed. A tiny, dangerous spark lit up in his pupils. "I found the lockbox." I whispered, "I have the Hallowmere document in my bag. I know about the under 26 clause. I know about the debt. And I know about the forgery on my credit account." I waited for him to flinch. I waited for the fear. But Grant Phillips did not fear his children. He only managed them. He smiled. It was a terrifying, pitying smile. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the champagne on his breath. "You broke into my house?" he asked softly. "I am trying to save you from prison." I hissed. If Lila signs that, it is over. I have the proof. I will show it to the agency rep right now. Grant laughed. It was a short, dry sound. Go ahead, he said. I blinked. What? Show him, Grant said. Who do you think he will believe? The reputable business owners and the celebrated daughter? Or the estranged, hysterical sister who breaks into homes and forges documents to get attention? He squeezed my arm. Hard. You have always wanted attention. Lucy, he said, since you were a little girl, you couldn't stand it when the sun shined on Lila. You always had to make up stories to get people to look at you. That is what this is, a story, a sad, desperate story from a woman who is unwell. I stared at him. He was rewriting the reality of the moment while it was happening. He was weaponizing my own trauma against me. I have the papers, I said, my voice shaking. And I have the police on speed dial, he countered. One word from me, and you are arrested for burglary and harassment. Do you think your job will keep you after that? Do you think your landlord will keep you? He leaned back, adjusting his cufflinks. Walk away. Lucy, go back to your sad little apartment and let us save this family. He brushed past me, walking toward Lila, as if I were nothing more than a piece of lint he had flicked off his sleeve. I stood frozen for a beat. The gaslighting was so total, so confident, that for a split second, I questioned my own sanity. Did I make it up? Was I the villain? Then I felt the weight of the tote bag against my hip. The paper, the ink, the truth. I wasn't crazy. I was just inconvenient. I looked at the stage. Marlene was organizing the tableau. She was positioning the flowers, checking the camera angles. She looked like a director on a set. I walked up the stairs. I didn't go to the center. I went to the side, where Marlene was standing near a monitor. Marlene, I said. She turned. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked annoyed, like I was a caterer who had brought the wrong appetizers. Lucy, she said. Her voice was light, conversational. You look tired. That sweater is doing you no favors. I am not here to talk about my sweater. I said. I looked her in the eye. I know you sent the email to the bank. I know you stole my identity to pay for this. Marlene sighed. She reached out and smoothed a stray hair from my forehead. Her touch was cold. We did what was necessary. She said, we always do. Necessary? I asked. Erasing me was necessary? Oh, stop it, she said, her tone dripping with a condescending sweetness. You are so dramatic. No one is erasing you. We are just correcting the narrative. Lila needs this. We need this. Why can't you just tell the truth? I asked. The truth? Marlene laughed softly. The truth is boring. Lucy, the truth is messy. And frankly, the truth doesn't pay the mortgage. She stepped closer. Her perfume, heavy, floral, suffocating, enveloping me. Why can't you be happy for your sister? She asked. Just for one night? Why do you have to be so bitter? I am not bitter, I said. I am 33. Marlene smiled. It was the smile of a stranger. You were never built for celebration, she said softly. You were always the heavy one, the dark cloud. That is why we didn't invite you. Darling, you just bring down the aesthetic. The cruelty was so precise, so understated, that it took my breath away. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper. It was a confirmation of every insecurity I had harbored since I was 5 years old. You are the dark cloud. You are the flaw in the picture. But this time, the cruelty didn't make me shrink. It made me calcify. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the Botox. I saw the desperation in the way she gripped her clipboard. She wasn't a queen. She was a frightened woman building a fortress out of lies because she was too weak to live in the real world. I am not leaving, I said. Marlene's smile faltered. Suit yourself, she said, but stay out of the frame. She turned her back on me and walked toward the center stage. I walked back down the stairs. My heart was hammering, but my head was clear. They were immune to appeal. They were immune to shame. They had convinced themselves that their survival justified my destruction. I needed anchors. I needed to know that I wasn't the only person in the room who saw the cracks. I scanned the crowd. I saw a flash of red hair near the bar. Tessa. She had come. I had texted her my location when I parked, but I wasn't sure if she would make it. But there she was, holding a glass of seltzer, looking at the stage with an expression of profound disgust. I pushed through the crowd toward her. Tessa. I breathed when I reached her. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was solid, real. I am here, she said. I saw your text. This is... Lucy. This is insane. The banners? The t-shirts? It is like a cult. They are going to sign a trust document. I said, my voice low. It pays out only if she is under 26. That is why the agency guy is here? Tessa asked. To verify it? Yes, I said. I tried to stop Grant. He threatened to have me arrested. Tessa looked at Grant, who was now leading Lila to the table. Okay, she said. What do you need me to do? Do you want me to pull the fire alarm? I will do it. I don't care. No, I said. No alarms. I need you to witness. Witness what? Witness the truth. I said, if I speak, they will say I'm crazy. They will say I am lying. I need someone to hear what happens next who isn't on their payroll. I am not going anywhere, Tessa said. She moved to stand slightly behind me, a physical shield against the room. I looked past her and saw someone else. Wanda, the neighbor I had met in the square. She was standing near the buffet, clutching her purse. She looked out of place in her wool coat among the sequins and tuxedos. She was watching Grant with a fearful intensity. She had come. She knew something about the crying woman. She knew something about the origin of the twins. And her presence here, uninvited and uncomfortable, meant that the town's memory was waking up. My parents could buy the venue, but they couldn't buy everyone's silence forever. I took a deep breath. The music lowered to a hush. Grant and Marlene stood on either side of the table. They looked like proud monarchs. Lila stood between them. The silver dress shimmered under the ring lights. She looked small. She looked incredibly young. Not because she was 25, but because she was regressing into a child before our eyes. Lila, Grant said, his voice booming, your future awaits. He handed her the gold pen. Lila took it. Her hand was shaking so badly that the pen tapped against the table, a tiny rhythmic sound amplified by the silence of the room. Tap, tap, tap. She looked up. She scanned the room. She wasn't looking for the cameras. She wasn't looking for the agency rep. She was looking for me. Her eyes found mine. We locked gazes across 20 feet of ballroom floor. In that half second, I saw everything. I saw the apology she had texted me. I am sorry. But I also saw the terror. She was trapped in a cage of debt and expectation that our parents had built. Bar by bar. She was begging me to save her. But she was also warning me. If you stop this, the roof falls in. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I just stood there, holding the tote bag, bearing witness. Lila looked down at the document. The cameraman stepped closer, zooming in on the paper for the B-roll footage. The image from his camera was being fed to a large monitor set up near the stage, so the guests could see the historic signature. I looked at the monitor. The document was crisp and white. The header read, Hallomere Family Trust, Beneficiary Designation. I read the text visible on the screen. I, Lila Phillips, do hereby accept the terms of the trust. And then, my eyes caught the line below it. As the sole surviving child beneficiary designation, acknowledging the absence of any competing claims or siblings of legal standing, the world stopped. Sole surviving child. It wasn't just about age. It wasn't just about declaring Lila under 26, to make the trust airtight, to prevent any future contest from the other twin who was visibly 33. They had to legally remove me from the family tree. The voluntary relinquishment I had found in the box regarding the Vance estate, that was just practice. That was just a test run to see if they could get a forgery past a clerk. This was the main event. This document didn't just give Lila money, it declared, legally and irrevocably, that she was the only child. It implied that I was either dead, disowned, or had never existed in the eyes of the estate. If she signed that, I wasn't just an estranged sister, I was a legal non-entity. I would have no claim to family medical history, no claim to future inheritance, no claim to my own identity as a Phillips. I looked at Marlene. She was watching the monitor with a hungry, predatory intensity. I looked at Grant. He was watching Lila's hand. They weren't just thieves. They were executioners. They were killing off one daughter to feed the other. And Lila knew. I looked at her face on the screen. She was reading the same line. Her lips moved slightly. Soul surviving. She paused. The pen hovered over the paper. Sign it. Sweetheart, Grant urged. His voice a low rumble that the microphone barely picked up. I felt a clarity that was colder than ice. There was no going back. There was no keeping the peace. There was no scenario where I drove home, went to work tomorrow, and pretended this didn't happen. If I stayed silent now, I was consenting to my own deletion. I was agreeing that I didn't matter. I was agreeing that I was the dark cloud that deserved to be dissipated so the sun could shine on Lila. I looked at Tessa. She saw the screen too. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Lucy, look at the language." "I see it," I said. I stepped forward. The fear was gone. The embarrassment was gone. The years of conditioning. The years of trying to be small so I wouldn't ruin the photo. The years of fading back. It all evaporated. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't a mood killer. I wasn't a glitch in their system. I was the only person in the room who was real. I dropped the tote bag on the floor. It landed with a heavy thud. I didn't need the papers anymore. I didn't need the proof in the bag. The proof was on the screen. I walked toward the stage. The security guard started to move toward me, but I didn't stop. I walked with a momentum that made him hesitate. I walked like I owned the building. Grant saw me coming. His eyes widened. He took a step away from the table, breaking the perfect tableau. "Lucy, don't," he mouthed. I didn't look at him. I looked at the microphone standing on the podium, just a few feet away from the signing table. The music was still playing a soft, inspirational loop. The guests were still watching the monitor. I walked up the stairs. Lila looked up. The pen slipped from her fingers and rolled across the document, leaving a long black streak of ink across the words, "Soul surviving." I reached the podium. I grabbed the microphone stand. I felt the cold metal against my palm. I looked out at the blinding lights. I looked out at the faces of the people who had watched me grow up and then watched me disappear. I took a breath. It was time to introduce myself. The microphone was cold against my palm. It was a heavy industrial object, designed to amplify voices that were supposed to be heard. Singers, politicians, fathers giving toasts. It was not designed for the voice of the daughter who had been edited out of the script. I stood there, blinking against the glare of the spotlights. The music was still playing a soft, looping orchestral track, a soundtrack for a heartwarming moment that had just been murdered. I looked out at the room. 200 faces stared back at me. I saw the confusion rippling through the crowd like a wave. They were waiting for the punchline. They were waiting for Grant to laugh, or for Marlene to explain that this was part of the skit, a dramatic reenactment of some sisterly quirk. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I leaned into the mic, my voice steady, stripped of all the trembling that was currently wrecking my nervous system. "I am Lucy Phillips," I said. My voice boomed through the ballroom, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. "I am Lila's twin sister, and this is not her 25th birthday." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath. Then, a nervous titter of laughter broke out near the back, quickly hushed by a neighbor. I looked at the camera monitor. I saw myself on the screen, a woman in a sweater standing next to a woman in silver silk. We had the same nose. We had the same jawline. We had the same eyes. Though mine were clear and Lila's were swimming with panic. We were born on October 14th, 1993. I continued, We are 33 years old. Marlene stepped forward. Her face was a mask of rigid, terrifying brightness. She reached for the microphone stand, her fingers clawing at the air. "Okay," she shouted, her voice shrill without the amplification. A round of applause for Lucy. "Everyone." She always loves to make a joke. She loves the attention. She tried to grab the mic from my hand. I didn't let go. I held it with a grip born from 3 decades of being pushed aside. "It is not a joke. Marlene," I said into the feed. The speakers caught the wet, sharp sound of my breath. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I had kept the essential copies: the trust clause, the bank fraud report, the amended birth record, separate from the heavy bag I had dropped. I pulled out the folded packet. I turned to Julian Thorne, the representative from Starling and Company. He was standing near the edge of the stage, his game show smile faltering, his eyes darting between me and Grant. "Mr. Thorne," I said. I walked over to him, trailing the mic cord behind me. "You are about to sign a partnership based on a youth branding strategy. You might want to see the actual birth certificate before you deposit the check." I handed him the papers. He took them. It was a reflex. He looked down at the top sheet, the copy of the birth record from the county archives, showing the original date before the amendments. Grant lunged. It wasn't a physical tackle, but it was violent all the same. He stepped between me and the crowd, using his broad shoulders to block the camera's view of me. "Cut the feed." He roared at the tech crew. "Cut the mic." He turned to the crowd, his face flushed, veins standing out on his neck. "My daughter is unwell," he shouted. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She has a history of mental instability. She has been off her medication. She is having a psychotic break. Please, everyone, bear with us while we get her some help." It was the nuclear option. It was the lie they kept in the glass case for emergencies. "Lucy is crazy." It explained everything. My exclusion, my anger, my delusions. I saw the crowd waver. I saw pity on the faces of the neighbors. Oh, poor Grant, poor Marlene, dealing with a sick child. The microphone was still live. The tech crew, paralyzed by the chaos, hadn't cut the sound. "If I am mentally unstable," I said, my voice cutting through Grant's shouting, "then why is my credit score good enough for you to use?" Grant froze. "Why is my credit card paying for the champagne in your hand?" I asked. I turned back to the crowd. I didn't look at Grant. I looked at the people. "If I am crazy," I said, "then you should ask my father why the authorized user he added to my bank account last month was verified using his wife's email address." I recited the address. I said it clearly, letter by letter, marlene.phillips.design@email.com. The specificity hung in the air. You can fake a vague accusation of madness. You cannot fake the specific administrative details of credit fraud. I saw the shift happen. The pity on the faces of the guests turned to confusion, and then to a cold, dawning horror. They were wealthy people. They understood money. They understood that you didn't accidentally attach your email to your estranged, crazy daughter's bank account unless you were managing her assets against her will. I walked over to the edge of the stage. "Wanda," I called out. Wanda jumped. She was clutching her purse to her chest, standing near the buffet table. "Wanda, you knew the family when we were born." I said, "You remember the woman in the blue car? You remember the timeline?" I tossed the second packet of documents down to her. It landed at her feet. "Read the trust clause." "Wanda," I said, "tell them what the payout age is." Wanda looked at the papers. She looked at me. She looked at Grant, who was now staring at her with a look of pure, concentrated venom. But Wanda was a widow who walked her dog at midnight. She had lived in Briar Glen longer than my parents. She picked up the papers. She put on her reading glasses. Her hands were shaking. But she read, it says, "Under 26. Wanda read aloud. Her voice was thin, but in the silence of the room, it carried. The beneficiary must be under 26. The room broke. The whispers started as a low hum and quickly escalated into a roar. Phones were coming out. People were recording. The guests weren't looking at the stage with admiration anymore. They were looking at it like it was a car crash. I turned back to the table. Lila was still standing there. The pen was still on the table. The black streak of ink across the words, "Soul surviving," looked like a scar. "Lila," I said. She looked at me. The silver dress, which had looked so glamorous 10 minutes ago, now looked like a costume from a cheap play. She was shivering. "Tell them," I said. Grant grabbed Lila's arm. "Don't you say a word," he hissed. Lila flinched. She looked at his hand on her arm, the same hand that had steered her, molded her, and spent her future before she had even earned it. She pulled her arm away. It wasn't a violent motion. It was a collapse. She slumped, her posture giving way, her shoulders rounding. She didn't look 25. She didn't look 33. She looked like a child who had been asked to carry a boulder. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Speak up." Someone from the crowd yelled. Lila looked out at the audience. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the heavy contouring makeup. "I didn't know about the debt," she said, her voice gaining a jagged edge. "They told me it was for the family. They told me we were going to lose the house. They said if I just became 25 again, for a little while, it would fix everything." She looked at Grant. "You told me it was a loophole." She sobbed. "You didn't tell me you were erasing Lucy." Grant's face went gray. The narrative was dissolving. His star witness, his golden child, was testifying against him. Marlene stepped in. She was desperate now. She moved between Lila and the microphone, trying to block the camera's view of her crying daughter. She turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but not with sadness, with rage. "You signed the relinquishment." "Lucy!" she shouted. She wasn't using the mic, but she was screaming loud enough to be heard. "You wanted this." Marlene yelled. "You wanted to be separate. You always talked about wanting your own life, wanting to get away from us. We gave you what you wanted." I stared at her. "We gave you freedom," she shrieked. "We took you off the burden of the estate. We took you out of the obligations. You signed those rights away because you wanted to be free of this family." The room went quiet again. Watching the mother scream at the daughter, it was a twisted logic, the kind she had used on me for years, framing her neglect as a favor, framing her exclusion as a gift. I stepped closer to her. I looked into the face of the woman who had birthed me and then systematically tried to unmake me. Freedom isn't something you demand someone purchase by disappearing. I said, my voice was low, but the microphone caught every syllable. "You didn't give me freedom. Marlene, you sold my seat at the table." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud, a chaotic noise that signaled the end of the show. Julian Thorne, the starling representative, was the first to move. He didn't walk toward Lila to comfort her. He didn't walk toward Grant to ask for an explanation. He stepped back. He closed his suit jacket. He signaled to his cameraman, a sharp cutting motion across his throat. "We are done." I heard him say to his assistant, "Pack it up. We were never here." He began to walk briskly toward the exit, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of a fraud scandal. I saw the venue manager on a radio. "Call security," the manager was saying, "and call the police. We have admitted fraud on the premises. I am not losing my liquor license over this." Grant heard the word police. He went rigid. The color didn't return to his face. He looked like wax. He looked at the table, at the unsigned document, at the ruin of his plan. He started to reach for the papers, perhaps to tear them up, perhaps to hide them, but it was too late. Wanda was already holding the copies I had thrown to her. The guests were holding their phones. The cloud was eating the evidence faster than he could destroy it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A sharp, repeated vibration. I pulled it out. It was a text from my bank. "Fraud alert. Declined. Attempted transfer of $15,000 to external account ending in 8802. They were doing it now, even as the walls were falling down, even as the guests were gasping. Someone, Grant, or maybe Marlene, via a scheduled transfer, was trying to empty my account before the freeze I had requested took full effect. It was a race. It had always been a race. They weren't mourning the loss of their reputation. They were mourning the loss of their liquidity. I looked at Lila. She was standing alone in the center of the stage. Grant had backed away from her to argue with the venue manager. Marlene was chasing after the Starling rep, trying to salvage the deal. Lila looked at me. She looked stripped. The fantasy was gone. The 25-year-old influencer was dead, and standing in her corpse was a 33-year-old woman with a mountain of debt and parents who would likely be indicted. I felt a surge of anger, hot and familiar. She had gone along with it. She had worn the dress. She had accepted the silence. But then I looked at her hands. They were trembling at her sides, useless and empty. I looked at the way she stood, hunched forward, waiting for a blow that she knew was coming. I saw myself. I saw the years of conditioning we had both survived. I had survived by fighting. She had survived by fawning. We were two soldiers from the same war. Wearing different uniforms, I felt a brutal tenderness. It wasn't forgiveness. I couldn't forgive her for the Hallomere document. I couldn't forgive her for the silence. But I couldn't hate her, either. She was the other victim in the room, the one who hadn't made it out. I didn't walk over to hug her. I didn't offer her a ride. I just nodded. It was a small motion, a recognition. I see you. You are real. Good luck. Lila saw it. She closed her eyes and let out a long, shaking breath. She didn't try to follow me. She knew, just as I did, that the bridge was gone. I turned around. The crowd parted for me. People I had known my whole life, cousins, teachers, neighbors, stepped back as if I were dangerous, or perhaps holy. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I wasn't the difficult one anymore. I was the one who had burned the theater down. Lucy! It was Marlene. She was standing at the edge of the stage, abandoning her pursuit of the agent. Her face was twisted into something unrecognizable. Lucy! You get back here! She screamed. You ungrateful little... You ruined it. You ruined everything. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Grant was shouting something about lawyers. He was threatening to sue me for defamation. He was threatening to sue the venue. He was flailing, a man drowning in a sea of his own making. I walked through the ballroom. I walked past the champagne tower that was untouched. I walked past the Lila's legacy banner. I found Tessa near the door. She was grinning, a fierce, terrified grin. You did it, she whispered as I passed. I did. I said, Are you okay? She asked. No. I said, I am not. I kept walking. I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the night air. The cold was shocking. It felt clean. I walked down the stone steps. The valet was gone, likely watching the drama from the doorway. My car was where I had left it, blocking the Rolls-Royce. I got in. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use both of them to turn the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't look at the venue. I didn't look at the window where the party was dissolving into a legal nightmare. I put the car in reverse, backed up, and swung the nose toward the gate. I drove. I passed the Lila Turns 25 billboard on the way out. It was still lit, glowing in the darkness, a monument to a lie that was already dead. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of music. There was no sense of joy. There was only the quiet, crushing realization that I was an orphan now. I had parents, and I had a sister. But I didn't have a family. I had exposed the truth, and the truth had scorched the earth. I turned onto the highway, heading toward the city lights in the distance. I was broke. My credit was a mess. My family was likely going to prison. I was 33 years old, and I was entirely, terrifyingly alone. But as the speedometer climbed, as the miles put distance between me and Briar Glen, I realized something else. I was driving my own car. I was using my own name, and for the first time in my life, the silence in the vehicle belonged to me. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a real one, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to Stay Home, Nobody Wants You There. It has been a journey walking in Lucy's shoes, and I hope this story resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please drop a comment below and tell me your city or country. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories for more realistic, emotional dramas. I want to hear your thoughts. Did Lucy do the right thing? Could you have walked away like she did? Share your perspective in the comments. Thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next story.